Hello everyone. This is Dr. Swati Mishra from International School of Business Management at Suresh Ganviar University, Jaipur. And as we proceed with the topic of Indian business houses, moreover, we have covered a lot about the policy changes that were brought in and how these policy changes that were introduced, the 5 year plans that were introduced by the Indian government, we have discussed enough as to how they were actually supporting the Indian business houses, how they brought in a very welcoming change in the country's economic condition. And due to these economic policies, the Indian economy could actually flourished so well that the GDP grew to a very good scale, and we could actually see some good purchasing power and spending power develop in the hands of the normal Indian community. And this was another reason why actually consumerism could flourish in India and the industrial sector could actually flourish in India. Apart from that, we have also studied the industrial policy that was introduced in India and how it brought in a very welcoming change for the Indian industries, and how the introduction of this industrial policy actually supported the industrial segment and, of course, the new players of the country also. Today, the topic that we are going to discuss is basically the growth and persistence of the large business groups in India. And the idea behind studying this topic is because, we have studied and recognized the significance of the large family controlled business groups in the emerging markets. And if we also look at the researches that have been conducted, most of the researches are focused on analyzing the impact of concentrations of these private wealth on the economic development in home countries. And today's session is actually inclined towards examining the growth and persistence of the business groups ever since 1951, post independence in our country. And since independence, the government has attempted to operate an economic policy framework that had amongst its prime objectives the curbing of the tendency of the business groups to concentrate the economic power in their hands. So, as their growth was seen, synonymous with the concentration of wealth, business groups became obvious candidates for regulations. So, various policy instruments that we have already discussed in the previous sessions were introduced, such as the Industries Development and Regulation Act (IDR), which was introduced in 1951. Then the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act (MRTP Act) 1969. So all of them were introduced with the aim of erecting some barriers to their growth. And in 1991, economic reform ushered in the removal of the legislative barriers to the business growth towards the it was to incline towards the business groups. So we are also going to analyze that the large business groups, they expanded their share of wealth between 1951 till 69, but this growth was, arrested between 1970 to 1990. And since 1991, it has dwindled, and the preeminent position of some special groups like Tata and Birla as the two largest business groups remained unchallenged from 1951 until the emergence of course, the other groups like the Reliance Group in the late 1990s. So, however, there has been frequent change in the relative positions of the other groups also in and out of the top 20 list of Indian business houses. After the economic liberalization accelerated from 1991 onwards, there was a significant change in the ranks of these business groups in the top telecom sectors and all, and they have replaced many of the previously dominant players in the market. So this is interpreted that you know the central role of the entrepreneurship in the combination with the technological innovation and the opening up of the Indian economy to the international competition in disturbing established hierarchies in India. So more generally, the policy intervention appears to have been less effective in breaking up the concentrations of the economic power in India than the economic liberalization and increased competition. So that is what this topic is all about, and that is why I introduced this topic in detail to you people. So maybe we will take this one session, and it could be possible that if the discussion elongates, then we will take another one session also on this same topic, wherein we will be discussing the persistence and growth of the Indian business houses in the light of all the policy changes that occurred. And why I want to discuss it in thorough details, because this is going to be the conclusive today's session and maybe the next session if needed. Then these two sessions will actually be the conclusive sessions of these the third unit that we had taken up. And as we proceed, we'll be discussing some other things about the Indian business houses. So let's just discuss the aims of this sessions, the learning objectives. The learning objectives are to give the learners an understanding of the progress which is made by the Indian business houses post independence, and also to brief the learners about the need of the regulations on the big business players, and to make the learners go through the preeminent position of the Tatas and Birlas as the two largest business groups until the emergence of Reliance Group in late 1990s. And this session also aims to help the learners observe the policy interventions that were done by the government, why they were done, and what were the benefits out of them. After this session, the learners will have an understanding of the progress made by the Indian business houses after independence. The learners will have the knowledge about the need of regulations on the big business players. The learners will also carry the information about the preeminent position of the Indian business houses. So, as I've already introduced you to the introductory part, we will be discussing the presence of all the large business groups in the emerging markets. We will also discuss the positive and negative effects on the host countries' general economic performance. So, there is a lot to be discussed. So, as an introductory part, I'll just give you a brief overview of this, and then we will continue with the session. So, basically, as it is mentioned on the screen to you people, the presence of the large business houses on in the emerging markets has actually stimulated considerable interest in whether their performance has a positive or a negative effect on the host country's general economic performance. For example, There is a greater oligarchic family control over the large corporations, which is associated with worse economic conditions sometimes, and interventionist governments and underdeveloped markets institutions in a group of 41 countries, including India. So there has been a lot of research, and there have been some good authors who have suggested that the oligarchic family groups operate more efficiently by creating their own internal capital also, and marginal talent markets also, functioning largely independently of the institutional environment characterized by the bureaucracy, red tapeism, and of course the market failures. So this is of course very uh, what should I say, know neatly sidestepped actually. And the issue of the direction of casualty and the extent to which the large business groups, through the process of internalizing capital and labor markets, undermine the weak and inefficient institutional structures of the wider society. So this is what the today's session basically aims at. We need to find it out properly whether it has actually happened or not. So what happened was that from the beginning, the founders of modern India were concerned to ensure that the economic system did not concentrate well. So these concerns are enshrined in the Constitution of India also, which places an obligation on the government of the day to control the concentration of wealth and by implication the growth of large business groups. So when the India got independence, and it was a newly independent India in early 1950s, it was feared that the accelerated growth, you know, being predicted by some economic planners would further concentrate economic power. Curbing any such tendency became an integral part of the formal economic policy, and all firms in India were required to operate in a tightly controlled and regulated policy environment, exemplified by a complex licensing regime or license Raj, the disparaging name it was popularly known by. So the obliged firms to seek prior permission to issue some capital, to raise money from the financial institutions, and to obtain foreign exchange also. So a high tariff regime was imposed on the imported capital goods and raw material also that time. So that is why the effectiveness of government controls as a means for checking the accumulation of wealth attracted a wide debate even among the policy makers, and there have been arguments that the economic growth requires constant, resurrection and rejuvenation through the destruction of old and creation of new firms with new technologies, which was not part of the dominant orthodoxy earlier. But now, uh, you know, the idea has changed. The removal of controls would also facilitate the emergence of new entrepreneurs and lead to a diminution of the concentration accepted in the official circles also. So these were the ideas behind all these policy changes that were brought in. And only in the early 1990s, after a severe financial crisis which India faced, the decontrolling economic activity became very central to the economic policies. So since then, the government has initiated, wide-scale removal of controls, and it has taken steps to reduce the regulatory burden on the business. Competition has been increased in the domestic market by progressively removing the equity caps on the foreign direct investment, and also by reducing the tariffs on the imported goods. So, today we are basically trying to, in this session, we are trying to examine the growth and persistence of the large groups, as I have already told you. And the growth of the business groups is analyzed in terms of the increase or decrease in the share of the four macroeconomic variables, and these variables are chosen to represent different ways of measuring the concentration of wealth. So this session basically will be divided into two parts. In first part, uh, just give me a second. Yes. So in first part, we will be identifying the various phases through which the policy regime to control the growth of business groups has actually evolved, how it has developed from 1951 till 2001. And we will also be discussing the growth of business groups and which has been mapped across the changes in the policy regime. And in the second part, we will be discussing the persistence of the large business groups, and we will later on give the concluding remarks. So now let's move ahead with the part one, wherein we will be discussing the growth of the business houses from 1951 till 2001 initially. So the growth of business groups was initially regulated by these two acts which have been depicted in front of you. And for around 4 decades, from 1950, the growth of business groups was regulated by two principal legislative instruments, which was the Industrials Development and Regulation Act 1951 and the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act 1969. The IDR Act sought to basically prevent the concentration of wealth through a comprehensive system of licensing. And the MRTP Act was designed to regulate the growth of assets and market power of business groups. Periodic amendments were made to the IDR Act, and the MRTP Act was revised in 1982 and 1984. So, so as a part of the economic reforms that were introduced after 1991, the industries were delicensed and the industries were delicensed and the uh, you know threshold limit on the assets was also repealed, and these changes, together with the relaxation of controls over the capital and the credit markets and easing of the sector related policies, have removed all major policy barriers specifically targeted at the large business houses. In effect, the government switched to the relying on the forces of competition to satisfy their obligations under the constitution to limit the concentrations of wealth. So from 1951, there are three distinct policy regimes which were regulating the business groups, and they can be distinguished in three phases as I have depicted in front of you on the screen. Phase 1 from 1951 till 69, wherein the regulation through licensing under the IDR Act was continued. Then the phase 2 came in from 1970 to 1991, wherein regulation was there through a combination of licensing and the MRTP Act. And then comes the phase 3 after the 1991, you know, enhancement of market efficiency through deregulation and progressive tariff reductions was done. So now let's talk about the same phases that I've just spoken to you about in a bit of a detail. Like, when we talk about the growth of business groups in phase 1, basically this phase covers India's first 3 5-year plans and their successive annual plans also. So development strategy during this period was designed to achieve higher economic growth, complemented by the legislation to prevent the concentration of wealth. The IDR Act in 1951 empowered the central government to reserve industries of the national importance for the public sector. In other industries where private firms could participate, the Act required firms to obtain a license to establish any new undertaking and seek prior permission to produce any new line or undertake any substantial expansion program. Two other important pieces of legislation that sought to reduce the concentration of economic power were the Capital Issues Control Act, which was introduced in 1947 itself, which was intended to ensure wide dispersal of share ownership, and the Indian Companies Act, which was introduced in 1956, which actually restricted the intercorporate investment and directorships. So, in order to evaluate whether such policies were, you know, effective in curtailing the concentration of wealth, the government constituted four important committees in 1960s. Unfortunately, the committees defined business groups in different ways and used different parameters to measure the concentration levels. So, making the comparisons between the committee's findings is very difficult. So that is why if we talk about this monopolies inquiry commission was there also, which was which classified a company as being part of the business group if the group had a controlling equity stake of 50% or more. So the MIC, using an assets threshold of rupees 5 crore or more, identified 75 groups controlling a total of 1,536 companies that time in 1964, which it defined as the large business groups. So, in contrast with this, it was argued that the business group could be represented by a series of concentric circles and so allocated group companies between the inner and the outer circles. So, units assigned to the inner circle had decision making powers. Those in the outer circle were companies where the group had 50-50 or minority equity participation. And then 20 groups were identified, which were referred to as the complexes, but did not classify any group as large. There was a Dutt committee also, which was identifying all these business groups and working upon them. So they used the criterion of one third or more of the effective equity, defined as the total equity capital minus the holdings by the state sponsored financial institutions, governments, and non resident Indians, to identify the large group controlled companies. The committee then set a threshold of assets worth over rupees 35 crores to be identified as the large business houses. And in 1966, they identified somewhere around 73 large business houses in the country. The relative share of Indian business groups by total paid up the capital, net fixed assets, and net fixed capital, stock, and gross capital stock, while the MIC used paid up capital and total assets to classify the large business houses. So there is a table over here, and you can see the share of those top 20 business groups. Okay, so the share of the top 20 business groups in the private corporate assets increased during the 1950s, while the share of the assets reported for the 1960s is not strictly comparable with that of the 1950s, due to the differences in the definitions and variables which were used. There is again a discernible increase in the relative share of the business group, This was widely attributed to the ineffective policy implementation. For example, the MIC observed that the controls actually helped the existing large firms by restricting the entry of these new firms. So now we will move ahead towards our phase two of discussion, which actually actually identified somewhere between 1970 till 1991. So let's talk about the second phase now. This second phase of analysis will cover the period from the fourth till the seventh 5-year plan actually. So now let's understand what actually happened during this period. During this period, the scope of legislation designed to curb the increasing concentration of private assets in the large business houses was extended significantly by the passage of the Monopolies and Restricted Trade Practices Act in 1969. The License Raj was also continued through the IDR Act. The MRTP Act legislation used both asset and control criteria to classify the large business groups. It covered the undertakings whose assets individually or together with the assets of the interconnected undertakings amounted to around 20 crore or more. So this limit was raised from 20 crores to 100 crores in 85. So now this analysis, let's take this analysis a bit further, and let's talk about the information which was reported by the Monopolies Research Unit. So I'll just tell you what was the analysis. The MRU reported the assets of the business houses and the paid up capital, turnover, profit before tax, which we call as PBT, on a very regular basis ever since 1971 until it was discontinued in 2003 with the abolition of the Department of Company Affairs. MRTP Act's definition of large business houses is also followed in today's analysis that we are doing. This is how they were analyzed, and this diagram clearly shows the share of the top 20 business groups in the total assets of the corporate sector in India since 1970 to 89, right? And you can see the share of the companies which have the the top-notch companies also and the other medium players also. So if you can notice here, in this table, there are two broad features that can be observed. First, between 72 to 84, and while that of the other large business groups are increasing, particularly in the second half of the 1970s. And then second, between 1985 till 1989, the share of the large business group assets in total assets of the whole corporate sector is actually declined. This suggests that the policy measures succeeded in slowing the growth of the large business houses between 72 to 89. Okay, so it is clearly shown here, since the share is reducing, you can observe that there is a declining phase in the collection of wealth in these business groups. So now we are moving ahead, and now we'll be talking about the growth of business groups in phase 3. So this actually started in the year 1991, and the year 1991 was a watershed in the history of the corporate sector in India. And there was a decisive break in the underlying political philosophy behind the macroeconomic management of India and the associated microeconomic policy instruments. So, from state intervention towards the economic liberalization, reform measures introduced from 1991 removed a large number of regulatory hurdles in order to increase the competition in the domestic economy. And as a part of these policy changes, the MRTP Act was amended in 1991, abolishing the asset limits on its scope, and regulation of market dominance and abuse of the market power was extended to the operation of all the firms. So now let us talk about the persistence of the large business groups in this situation, right? So now onwards, the discussion is basically divided into two sections. The first part basically covers the period of 51 to 90, and second covers the period from 1991, when the government actually abandoned the direct controls in favor of the liberalization and progressive opening of the Indian economy to the international investment and competition. Whereas earlier, the government of India was actively engaged in the microeconomic management of the growth of large business houses. Right. So let us talk about this persistence of the large business houses. So I just want to, while showing you the persistence of the large business houses, I just want to discuss a bit of the trends in the business group rankings between 51 till 90. So, despite the government's policy interventions to restrict concentration of economic power, this did not have the desired impact on the growth of very large business groups actually. So, for example, the Tata and the Birla groups maintained their position in the top two all through the top 20 all through the period of the regulatory intervention. Moreover, there were other groups like JK Singhania, Thapar, Mafatlal, who also retained their position in the top 10 for around 18 years from 72 till 90. The only major breakthrough in the top rank of Indian business houses was that of the Reliance Group. And that group actually ranked 67th in 1976, but then ranked third after 1986. So, if we just try to apply a less stringent test of the impact of the regulatory framework on the growth of business groups, which is to basically examine the movements in and out of the top 20, here there is a more evidence of changes in the ranking of the business houses. For example, of the top 20 in 1951, only 11 groups figure in the top 20 ranking for 1972, and only 9 survive into the top 20 list of 1990. Furthermore, some of the groups in the top 20 of the 1990 were late entrants such as M.A. Chidambaram that entered in 1985, Bajaj Group in 1979, Modi Group in 1976. So this is a figure over here which shows different ranking, and earlier you can see the Birla ranking second and Tata ranking first, and then post 1986 Birla was ranking 1 and Tata was ranking 2. And you can also see the entry of Reliance in 1976, and that time I just told you that its rank was 67, and from 86 81 it was 11th, and 86 onwards it ranked third in the list of top 20 large business houses. And then, of course, there were other players also. Some of the big names are mentioned here, like J.K. Singhania, Larsen and Toubro, Bajaj, Modi, Hindustan Lever, Bangad, Kirloskar, Mahindra and Mahindra, Ashok Leyland, Goenkas, and other names are also over here. Then by 1972 till 89 also. You can observe some major changes in the rankings. You can see over here. So this data basically confirms that the proportion of business groups in top 20 retaining their rank from one year to the next increases between 72 till 89. Conversely, more business groups drop out of 20 in the earlier years, and this implies that the large business groups were beginning to accumulate sufficient market power and assets to protect their positions for dominance in the Indian economy by the latter half of the 1980s. So now it is time for us to discuss what were the trends in the business group rankings after 1990. So since the mid 1980s, you know, India's top three business houses have remained Reliance, Tata, and Birla. However, a major change has been the displacement of Tata Group from the top position by the Reliance Group. Lower down the rankings, six business groups have moved out of the top 20 between 91 till 92 and 2000 till 2001. So on a year on year basis, there is noticeably greater churn in the business groups, moving in and out of the top 20 by comparison with the business period from 72 till 90. So if we take a closer examination of the companies moving into the top 20, it reveals the increasing prominence of the groups heavily involved in the new economy, especially the software related businesses and the telecommunications. A few of the older groups have moved up by the rankings by exploiting some new market opportunities also. For example, Bajaj, Hero, and TVS have all contributed to and benefited from the phenomenal growth in the demand for the two wheelers from an increasingly affluent urban population in 1990s. Many of the business opportunities realized by rising large business groups are in part a product of the easing of controls over the sector related policies, such as the controls on the importation of computer hardware and telecommunication equipment. uh, you know this relaxation of controls has basically enabled the business groups like Wipro and HCL to exploit the information technology, and of course to operate in the global marketplace where demand for software services originates. Other groups such as Hero and TVS, they rely more on the domestic demand, while easing of the policies has allowed them to obtain the necessary technology through collaboration agreements with foreign partners, mostly from Japan. So if you can see in this table, from 91 till 2002 and from 2000 to 2001, based on the relative shares in GDP, you can see the rankings and clearly observe the rankings. And post 2000, initially Reliance was ranking one, and then earlier rather it was Tata Group and Birla Groups. And these are some other groups also that made the top 20 at least once, like ACC, Nagarjuna, Godrej, Wadia, Modi, Kirloskar, Mafatlal Group also. There were some changes in the ranking later on, which can be observed on the screen also. Right. So let us move ahead with the discussion after observing this table. So the de-reservation of certain strategic sectors like oil exploration and refining, petrochemicals, steel and telecommunication which used to be the exclusive monopoly of the public sector until 1991, it has also, you know, helped a few already large business houses to move away from their earlier core businesses and grow even larger. Thus, the diversification into the petroleum refining and petrochemical production than into the original core business, as you know, some textile house or something like that. And this actually happened between 70s and 80s. So now if we talk about the economic growth basically stimulated by the reforms introduced after 91 has also created some new business opportunities. As the domestic demand has grown, liberalization has encouraged market seeking foreign investors to form alliances with the business groups. Though the very large business houses of the old regime, they continue to become stronger, including through the investing heavily in the uh, new economic uh, new economy, and the economic reforms have certainly facilitated the growth of the new business groups. So it has also reduced the relative performance of some of the older groups as well. So that is why the survival and indeed reconfiguration and expansion of some of the old business groups testify to the persistence of the entrepreneurship in India, even in highly restrictive business climate. Had Indian business groups grown only by deriving the benefits from a restrictive and protective policy regime, they would not have survived or flourished in the competitive post 1991 business climate, nor would they be as prominent as they are today. So that is why the reform process has opened up new opportunities for growth, which were recognized and exploited by the business groups, later on. So entrepreneurships may have been, seriously distorted by the license Raj regime, but it still survived. The entrepreneurial function is basically not only the vehicle of continual reorganization of the economic system, but also the vehicle of continued changes in the elements which comprise the upper strata of the society. The successful entrepreneur basically rises socially, and with him immediately dependent upon the his family also rises, and those who acquire from the fruits of his success a position not immediately dependent upon the personal conduct. So this represents the most important factor of rise in the social scale in the capitalist world, because it proceeds by the competitively destroying old businesses and hence the existence of people dependent upon them. There always corresponds to it as a process of decline or loss of caste or elimination. So this is not only because all individuals' profits dry up, but the competitive mechanism which is tolerating no permanent surplus values, but rather annihilating them by means of just this stimulus of striving for profit, which is the mechanism's driving force. So that is why these restrictions that were levied proved to be more constructive for the industries. So with this, we have reached the conclusion of today's session. It is good that we kept it very crisp and we did not elongate it unnecessarily, and we did not take multiple sessions for this. So we have examined the growth of the Indian business groups in terms of the increase or decrease in the relative shares of the business groups in some important macroeconomic indicators. And paradoxically, it was found that the top 20 business groups grew between 51 till 60, right? And later on we also observed that when license raj was abolished and mrtp were also in force, that time there were some other changes, and since 91 and the repeal of the restrictive legislation, there has been a constant decline in the growth of some business groups, together with the consolidation of position of the top three large business houses. So we have evaluated all these business houses. We have also analyzed how they have persistently increased. We have analyzed how inevitably this leads to the question of whether such groups contribute towards the concentration of wealth in economy, as was widely believed at the time of drafting of the Indian Constitution. So this is an important question which I'm leaving over to you people for pondering, for constant pondering. So that is all from my side for this session. This is Dr. Swati Mishra from International School of Business Management at Suresh Gyanvyar University, signing off. And thank you so much for going through the sessions of Indian business houses.